Hello everyone, my name is Aiman Maulana from Pokde, and today we're going to take the Toyota Corolla Cross Hybrid out for a drive. Now I'm going to share with you my experience driving this car and maybe point out some things that not only do I like but also the things that I feel like they could improve, whether it be in successors or maybe even refreshes of the car. So without further ado, let's get into it. When I first started driving this car, I remember I was actually quite surprised because the car started out so quiet. You don't even hear the engine. Now that's because when you first start it, highly likely, unless the thing is out of juice, it's going to be running on its EV battery first. I mean, it's a hybrid after all. It's going to be running on the battery, and later on, when it needs to, it'll switch over to the engine. Now it switches between the battery and the engine, and a mix of both, quite seamlessly, but you can definitely tell the difference for sure when it happens. It's just, you don't really have to do anything about it. You don't have to trigger anything. When it switches to the engine, you can hear the engine just suddenly come to life because it goes from quiet and it's you can feel just a little bit of vibration. But again, even with the engine on, the noise is minimal at best, so it's not too bad. Now for me, the Corolla Cross Hybrid is a nice size, provided someone like me is sitting in the front. Now what I mean here is that, okay, I am about 186, 187 centimeters tall, so 6'2" basically. And sitting in the front with the seats all the way to the back, it's quite comfortable. There's ample amount of space for my legs. I can still kind of relax, no problems. But if I'm sitting at the back with the driver's seat all the way behind, there's no space for my legs. It gets a bit uncomfortable. It feels like I'm in economy seats of a cheap flight, if I'm being honest. But if, let's just say, the driver can just push just a little bit forward, it's quite okay. So ideally for those people who are tall, really tall, or particularly long legs, you should sit in the front. Now to me, the outside of the car looks pleasing, really. It looks a little bit strong, doesn't look like it's trying to show off or anything like that. And there's a certain level of elegance to it that I actually do enjoy. But that's the outside. The inside, to me, is I wouldn't say it's a big problem, but it's what would turn me off from getting this car, because if I'm being honest here, the inside of the Corolla Cross Hybrid is kind of bland. It looks boring. There's really nothing much to it. There's not much fancy gadgets or anything like that. Just in case you're wondering, you do get leather wrap steering wheels, some soft touch plastics here and there, but of course hard plastics on top here. Now this makes sense because, to my knowledge, in other countries, the top part is also soft plastics, but for Malaysian weather, I think they did it on purpose, because the problem with soft touch plastics, after some time, given how hot our weather can get, it can start to melt and then get a little bit sticky, and no one wants that. Now the Corolla Cross Hybrid does have a large infotainment system. I believe it should be 9 inches. It might be 8, but I believe it's 9 inches. Now the good part about here is it does come with Android Auto and Apple CarPlay support. But keep in mind, with Apple CarPlay, it only supports it by wire. Now it's good to have this, but I do have a little bit of complaints. Just a little bit. Now it's not the fact that it doesn't have wireless Apple CarPlay support. I think that's still fine. I think if anything, it's a kind of a luxury to have. But what I don't like is that sometimes the connection can be a bit unstable. So I'll give you a few examples. So the first one is that sometimes you need to connect it 2 or 3 times in order for it to properly detect. Otherwise it just assumes that there is no device connected to it, despite my iPhone actually showing that it is charging, therefore it is connected. Now the other part here is that sometimes when you're using it, it just automatically disconnects by itself, which is a little bit annoying. Now when that happens, you just have to quickly disconnect, reconnect again, and it should be fine. But sometimes, again, the initial part, you kind of have to do that 2 or 3 times for it to detect properly. Now on the steering wheel, you do have some buttons that will help you use the infotainment system without just reaching out to it. Most notably, it's volume control and moving on to the next or the previous track. Now, the volume buttons have not failed on me once, It has worked consistently, but there have been a number of times where the previous and next track buttons do not work. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't work at all. It does work sometimes, but more often than not, you're gonna have to reach out to the screen directly and use the touchscreen in order to do that, because otherwise something just doesn't want to work, and it's just unfortunate. I'm not too sure what's the issue, but that is the case with this one. Now, the last thing I don't really like about this is the fact that the USB port is on the infotainment system itself. Now, usually with most cars, you'd have the USB port somewhere down here in this area. But in this case, it's directly embedded here. Now, what's the issue exactly? It's a bit of an eyesore, knowing that you're going to have your cable kind of flailing about here. So it kind of gives it a bit of a cheap feeling. It feels like a aftermarket hit unit, if I'm being honest. But yeah, the more annoying part here is just the fact that you have your cable kind of just around, and it's not really pleasing to the eyes. I don't think it will ever come to a point where it will disrupt your driving experience. Like, it's not gonna disturb you from, say, changing gears, for example. But it would have been a much cleaner effort if they just put the USB port somewhere here. You know, somewhere a bit more hidden. The sound system itself is pretty fine. I'd say I have nothing to complain about, but I just wish there was a little bit more oomph in the bass department. Like, the mids and highs are decent at best, but you can clearly feel that it's lacking in the lows, the bass. It feels like you're listening to laptop speakers, and you can get a decent amount more bass from a simple Bluetooth speaker. Now, this isn't really a problem, because if you're just listening to music just for the sake of listening to music, it's perfectly fine. But if you just want a little bit more enjoyment, you can always just install like a subwoofer. Now, when it comes to cooling, this car does have dual zone climate control. So one on the left side, one on the right side, which you can set by the dials right here. Now, for me, the aircon does get quite cold. I mean, if you set it really cold, but it can work really well. But now, this isn't necessarily a problem, but I feel like the wind isn't particularly strong. Now, even at max speed, you get a whole lot of noise, but it doesn't feel like there's a whole lot of wind. Now, let me give you an example. So this is at max fan speed, by the way. It gets rather noisy, yes, but yeah, it doesn't really feel like there's a lot of wind going about here. But, let me turn this down for a bit. But, I'd say the saving grace here is that not only because it cools the car down well enough, I mean the aircon system, but it's not really that much of a problem given the fact that you also do have rear aircon vents. So whoever's sitting at the back should not have any issues. In fact, anyone who's sitting in the car shouldn't have any issues. Provided everyone can of course agree on the temperature, but that's a subjective problem. When I first started driving this car, I found it rather interesting because, I mean, it's a comfortable drive, but it felt a little bit too slow for a 1.8 car. Now, I know it's not a sports car, it's a hybrid SUV, but I expected a little bit better. But I also just reminded myself not long after that, this is not my car. This is a new car that you're driving, and there's one thing that I have to remind myself, which is the existence of like drive modes. So I was stuck on eco, and that's why that's the case. The acceleration was taking a while to like reach anywhere, because I'm pretty much stuck driving at about what, 60, barely like 80 if anything. So the moment I switched over to the standard driving mode, it's like, oh, everything feels fine again. Like, it feels like it should be. And then I moved over to sport mode, where the throttle response got even better, so it accelerates a whole lot quicker. And yes, it does feel kind of fun to drive, but I would not really recommend using that for too long, because since you're driving a hybrid, you want it to be fuel efficient, not trying to mimic a sports car. You're not trying to drive really fast. But it is very useful to have still. Mostly because if you ever need to overtake like the car in front of you, like you need to move to the right lane, it's a much needed feature. Sure, you can kind of do that in standard, but the sport mode will really help do that better. Then once you're done, just switch it back. If there was one thing that I don't particularly like about this car when it comes to driving it, is the fact that it uses a foot brake. Now, in case you weren't aware, the Corolla Cross Hybrid does not have like a manual handbrake, nor does it use EPB, electronic parking brake. Instead, it uses a foot brake, which is another pedal, pretty much where you expect a clutch is to be if you've driven a manual car before. Now, my issue with this is that it feels a bit old school for a modern day car, and it takes up a bit of unnecessary space like down there.
That's what she said!
Another good one! You're on fire!
Now, to my knowledge, at least in other countries, the refreshers have started using electronic parking brakes, EPB, so hopefully we'll get to see that if they bring a refresh model here this year, if not next year. Now, who would I recommend this car to? Now, if you're someone like me, who doesn't really need to get to the destination as fast as possible, don't want to drive as fast as possible, just want a quiet, comfortable drive, then yes, this will serve you well over the long term. I know I'd be happy using this over the long term if I could. Now, in the age where people are getting more and more worried about petrol prices, especially given the whole subsidy situation in Malaysia right now, it's natural that people are going to look for alternatives. So, EVs, hybrids. Now, the idea here with the Corolla Cross Hybrid, and I believe this is also the case with Toyota's hybrids in general, is that they want to keep it as simple as possible. You basically just take the car and drive. You don't have to worry about charging, you don't have to worry about anything. Just as long as you maintain the car as it should be, you'll be fine. Now, I think that will be all from me for this video. Now, this isn't meant to be like a full in-depth review video. If anything, just me describing my experience driving this car. I feel like there's a lot of details that will be better for me to share through an article, so do stay tuned for the full in-depth review for this car, the Toyota Corolla Cross Hybrid. And I guess that'll be it from me for today. I'll be driving around for now just for fun, and yeah, I guess I'll see you guys again next time then. Bye!